A black man in a smart suit boarded a flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. He had a first-class ticket in his hand, seat 1A, the seat he had booked 3 months earlier. But a few minutes later, a flight attendant approached him, smiling awkwardly. "I'm sorry, sir. This seat has been reassigned to another passenger. If it were you, what would you do? Would you get angry? Would you scream, demanding justice for yourself? Or would you stay silent, like that man did? Silent, but making the whole world stop. 3 taps, just 3 light taps on the table, and 173 planes grounded at the same time. An act that changed aviation history and begs the question, does fairness really exist? Or is it only for the privileged today?" We will hear the story of Dr. Elias Monroe, the man who stopped the sky. A story about dignity, faith, and the power of calm. If you believe that silence can also create a revolution, please like, share this story, and subscribe to the channel to join me on this emotional journey. The morning at JFK Airport carried the biting cold of February. The breaths of those waiting in line for early flights drifted like wisps of smoke in the air. The loudspeaker announcements rang out regularly, mixed with the smell of coffee and the sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the cold stone floor. In the midst of the crowd, Dr. Elias Monroe walked slowly, his old brown leather suitcase tilted slightly beside him. The light reflected off his glasses, highlighting his calm face, his eyes deep and calm like the surface of a lake before the wind blew. He dressed simply, gray khakis, black wool jacket, no flashy logos, just an e-ticket in his hand and a worn silver watch. He was a man who didn't need to show off. People would see him in a small coffee shop, reading the morning paper. No one would know that the man was the CEO of Next Aero Systems, the second largest aviation technology group in the U.S., and a strategic shareholder of Skybridge Air, the airline he was about to take off with. Elias went to the check-in counter. The young woman looked up, smiling her usual service smile. "Good morning, sir. May I have your ID?" He showed her the card. The entire procedure went smoothly. She printed out the ticket, handed it to him, and said in surprise, "First class. Flight 703 to San Francisco. You travel a lot, don't you?" Elias smiled. "Only when the world needs fixing." She didn't understand what he meant, just smiled politely. As I approached the gate, morning light streamed in through the large windows. Passengers were standing in lines, some with headphones in, others on their phones. The screen displayed the word Skybridge 703, boarding Group 1, Gate B12. He stood in line, quiet. Miles Davis's soft melody, Blue and Green, played in his ears every morning. Music always slowed his mind down, freed from the dust of this fast-paced world. Suddenly, a man behind him spoke, his voice soft but audible. "Funny, you don't usually see people like him in first class." Another man chuckled softly. Elias heard it clearly, but he didn't turn around. He just adjusted his headphones slightly, as if the jazz trumpet had just played a beat longer. It wasn't the first time he'd heard it. He'd heard it from professors, security guards, even investors. He'd learned not to let it get to him, but every time it had left a small mark like the scratch on the face of his watch. The ticket scanner beeped dryly. The flight attendant looked at the screen, frowning. "Sir, could you wait a second?" Elias paused, smiling. "Of course." She pressed a few buttons, then turned back, her voice slightly flustered. "I'm sorry, but this seat might not be available anymore. There's a system update." "Not available?" he asked again, still calm. "I booked it 2 weeks ago." "Just a moment, please." The man behind him, plump, in a gray suit, with a large ring, interrupted, "Must be a mix-up. I'm sure he belongs in the other section." The flight attendant was silent, avoiding looking at Elias. The air in the small hallway froze. Several people in line started turning their heads. A young girl took out her phone and secretly filmed a video. Elias took a deep breath, then spoke slowly. Each word clearly. I have a confirmed seat. 1A. You can check the system. The flight attendant nodded, her hands shaking slightly. Let me call my supervisor. Elias looked around the first-class cabin as the doors opened. There were only 7 seats. Soft yellow lighting illuminated the leather seats. Everything was neat and quiet. He thought about the flight, about the meeting in San Francisco, where he would present a paper on ethical AI in civil aviation, a project he had been working on for 3 years. Outside, the snow began to fall. Each flake that melted on the glass felt like a dot of memory. In his mind, a phrase from his mother appeared, her voice from long ago, warm and firm. You don't need to prove you deserve to sit here. Just sit where you worked hard to get there. Elias squeezed his hand. The flight attendant on the other end was on the phone. The voice on the intercom was low, but enough for him to catch 2 words: seat dispute. A woman in a white coat and a Prada bag walked quickly over. Her eyes widened in annoyance when she saw him standing there. Excuse me, this must be a misunderstanding, she said to the flight attendant. I always sit in 1A. The flight attendant looked at Elias, then at her. The air was thick. A cold wind blew in from the open door, fluttering the hem of his coat. He looked into the woman's eyes, his voice calm and clear. Then maybe today is the day it's someone else's turn. No one said anything. The world seemed to slow down. The loudspeaker sounded again. Boarding will close in 5 minutes. Elias walked lightly to his seat, placed his suitcase beside it, and sat down. The flight attendant watched him, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. Outside, the snow fell harder. Another plane rolled by, a pale trail of light against the gray sky. In that moment, Elias let out a soft breath. He knew this flight would be more than a journey. It would be a test for him and for the world he was trying to change. The first-class doors closed, and the engines began to hum softly outside. Everyone was seated, and only a thin tension hung between the rows of seats. Elias Monroe sat up straight, his eyes looking out the window. Thin snowflakes were falling steadily and slowly, melting as they touched the cold glass. In his heart, what was melting was not snow, but the familiar feeling of verification. Every time like that, he wondered, when will people like him no longer have to prove they deserve to sit in a seat whose name was written on the ticket flight attendant. Melissa Carter stood at the front of the cabin, her hands tightly gripping her notebook. She avoided Elias's gaze, then looked at the woman sitting across from him. Catherine Blake? Catherine put her Prada bag aside, took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp as knives, her voice cold and dry. Look, this is ridiculous. I've flown this route for years. Seat 1A has always been mine. Maybe he booked the wrong flight. Melissa Kogang Yu Jong Trung Lap ma'am. According to the system, both your tickets show seat 1A. I'm waiting for the supervisor to confirm, Catherine chuckled. Then you should know who to prioritize. Elias turned back. He looked straight at her, his voice soft but clear. What exactly do you mean by that? The air seemed to freeze. Melissa looked down at the floor, avoiding their eyes. Catherine tilted her head, her smile still there, but her eyes were challenging. I mean, there are regular flyers, and then there are special clients. Skybridge knows the difference. Elias nodded slightly. He turned back, his voice low, as if speaking more to himself than to her. Sometimes, the difference isn't who's special, it's who remembers what respect means. A few other passengers in the cabin looked up. A man in the back seat muttered, "This is going viral. Just wait." Outside, the cold wind whipped against the plane's wings. Inside, the same cold seeped through every glance, every breath. 10 minutes passed, and no one said anything. The loudspeaker on the ceiling announced, "We are experiencing a slight delay due to a technical issue. Please remain seated." Elias opened his phone and checked his email. The screen lit up with a series of work notifications. One of them was a reminder for his speech in San Francisco Ethical AI When Machines Learn Bias from Humans. He smiled slightly, a sad smile. It was ironic. He was on his way to talk about systemic prejudice, and here it was being played out in vivid detail before his eyes. He gently typed a few notes, his thoughts echoing steadily in his head. Humans create systems, and when humans are unfair, the system simply learns their bias and then replicates it. An old memory flashed back, a morning many years ago when he was the only black student in his aerospace engineering class. A professor had said to him, "You're smart, Elias. But this field, it's not really made for people like you." He remembered the feeling of hearing those words clearly. Not anger, just a thick silence, as if the air around him was judging him. But from that moment on, he swore he would never leave this path, until he made it impossible for anyone else to say those words to him. Sir Melissa's voice pulled him back to the present. "What's the matter? The manager is here. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience." He nodded. "Don't worry. It's not you." Melissa bowed her head slightly. She had never seen a passenger so calm. Most would be screaming, filming, demanding refunds, or calling lawyers. But this man just sat there, silent, as if observing not just the problem, but its nature. The cabin door opened, and Mark Bennett, the flight manager, walked in. He was tall, square-shouldered, and wore a dark blue suit. He looked at the two passengers facing each other and said quickly, "All right, let's fix this. Mrs. Blake, you're a Platinum Elite member." "Correct." Catherine nodded, arms crossed, eyes triumphant. "Marquis," sang Elias. "And you, sir, may I see your ticket?" Elias handed over the ticket, his voice still calm. "Of course. Mark hin man, hin maiting bang, roquay lay. There seems to be a duplicate reservation. Mrs. Blake's status gives her priority. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move to another seat, sir." At that moment, all the surrounding sounds seemed to stop. Only the sound of his heart beating in his chest remained. Elias said nothing. He tilted his head slightly, looking at Mark. His eyes were not angry, just quiet, deep and strangely calm. Priority, and hoike, based on what, status or humanity? Mark looked slightly confused, but remained stoic. "I'm just following policy. Sir, Elias got jow. That's what everyone says. Right before history calls it discrimination." No one said another word. Catherine chuckled, whispering just enough for him to hear, "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." He turned, his eyes softening, his voice low and slow. "I'm not making it anything. I'm just not moving." A silence. Mark looked at his watch, then sighed. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to involve security." Elias slowly took off his headphones. He placed the phone on the table, his voice low and clear. "Before you do that, maybe you should check who funds your navigation AI system." Catherine frowned. Melissa looked up. Mark frowned, not understanding what he was saying. Elias continued, "Next Aero Systems. Ring a bell." Mark's eyes changed. He looked back at the ticket, then at Elias, as if he had just realized something. "Elias Noi Tiep. Jong Tram. Ju, I helped design your flight operations model. I hold 15% of this airline's stock. So before you remove me, you might want to call your legal department." The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Catherine's eyes widened. Melissa held her breath. Elias looked straight at Mark. His eyes held no malice, just absolute certainty. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove anything. His strength lay in that cold calm. Mark was silent. His hand holding the tablet was shaking slightly. Finally, He just said, "I'll check with the captain." The compartment door closed behind him. Melissa turned away, and Catherine remained silent. Elias looked out. The snow was still falling, glittering under the airport lights. He smiled slightly, not because he had won, but because he knew the game had just begun. In seat 2C, Jordan Ellis, an independent reporter, was filming the whole scene. She said nothing, just looked at her phone screen, recording every moment. A strange feeling arose in her heart. This story will make the whole country listen. Elias remained seated, his hands resting on the small table. He exhaled quietly, touching the silver watch on his wrist. Once, twice, 3 times, the familiar rhythm he used to calm himself. 3 touches. Also the 3 opening beats of the storm he didn't know he was about to stir up. The door swung open. Footsteps echoed softly on the carpet. Mark Bennett returned, followed by a tall, dark blue security guard. Passenger eyes began to drift toward the front row. A wave of unease spread. Dr. Elias Monroe sat still, his hands on his knees. He looked straight at them, not avoiding them. His calm demeanor made the small room strangely quiet, except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Mark took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly, but still trying to maintain his authority. "Sir, I've spoken with the captain. We'll need you to relocate to another seat so we can proceed with boarding." Elias looked up, his eyes no longer smiling, but not cold either, just deep and calm, as if his every word was carefully considered. "Tell me something. Mr. Bennett, would you have said the same thing if I looked different?" Mark stiffened. The guard tilted his head, confused. Catherine, sitting a few feet away, let out a small, sarcastic chuckle. "Please, don't make this about race." Elias turned, his voice low but clear. "I don't need to make it about race. You already did." A few passengers inhaled sharply. No one dared speak. He continued slowly, each word falling like a steady tapping on the table. "All I did was take the seat I paid for, the same seat I've booked, confirmed, and printed on this ticket. Yet, I'm the one being asked to move. You tell me what that looks like." Catherine was silent. Mark glanced down at his tablet screen, not responding. Melissa stood behind him, her hands clasped together. She knew he was right, but in her position, she also understood the fine line between keeping a job and doing the right thing. The air was so heavy that one could hear one's heartbeat. Elias looked out the window. It was still snowing, but the light was beginning to change. A pale ray of sunlight appeared in the distance, reflecting off the glass. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Every storm starts with something small, a drop of rain, a single voice. Then he turned back. "I'm not moving." His voice was not loud, but loud enough for everyone to hear. There was no challenge, no anger, just absolute certainty. Mark looked at the guard. The other hesitated. "Sir, I understand your position," but Elias interrupted. "Still calm. I'm not your enemy, but I also won't be your lesson in obedience." In the quiet cabin, Jordan Ellis, a young journalist sitting in row 2C, was filming the whole scene. She spoke softly into her phone, almost in a whisper. "This is Flight 703, JFK to San Francisco. Watch closely. Something important is happening here." The live viewership display started to jump rapidly. Thousands of people were watching. Elias remained seated. Melissa approached, her voice low. "Sir, maybe if you could just wait in business class. We can sort it out later." He shook his head slightly. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" she asked, almost pleadingly. He looked at her, his voice so soft she had to lean in to hear. "The point is, if I move now, someone else will have to do it tomorrow." Melissa stood still. The words cut her like a small, deep wound. Catherine sighed, shook her head, and muttered, "Some people just like playing victim." Elias looked over. His voice was still calm, but there was something shining in his eyes. Not anger, but determination. Playing victim means pretending. I don't need to pretend. She turned away without saying more. Mark signaled to security. The guard took a step closer. "Sir, please cooperate." "Elias, Hinlen? Noi. You're just doing your job." "I get it. But one day, you'll realize that following orders isn't always the same as doing right." The words made the guard stop. He took a step back. Mark clenched his tablet, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you don't comply, we'll have to call the airport police." Elias closed his eyes for a few seconds. He remembered another day, many years ago, at this same airport. He was a young engineer, held back because the security system randomly selected him for a baggage check. They opened his bag, took out each item, asked each question, while others passed through as if nothing had happened. He remained silent that day. He thought, if he remained silent long enough, the world would change. But it never did. Elias opened his eyes, his gaze a steely gleam. He pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen 3 quick, sharp, almost unconscious taps. No one understood what he just did. Then he put the phone back on the table, his voice low. "Call whoever you need to call. I'm not moving." Mark sighed, about to say something when the radio rang out. "Control. We have a delay alert on Flight 703. There's a sync error in the AI operations system. Mark New May." "What kind of error system freeze?" "Standby override detected. Grounding sequence initiated." Everyone in the cabin looked around, not understanding what was happening. Elias remained seated, calm, his eyes fixed on the window. He did not smile, just breathed lightly. Melissa turned around, worried. "What's happening? Elias Kajap, just a system check. It's about time someone did one." 10 minutes later, a loudspeaker blared throughout the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical issue in our operational network, all departures have been temporarily suspended. Please remain seated." Mark turned pale. He pulled out his phone and called, his voice trembling. "This can't be real. Catherine Chom Ngoide. What's going on? I have a meeting in Los Angeles." Elias said nothing. He just looked out. Dozens of planes were parked on the runway. The light reflected off the metal wings, creating long white streaks. A huge fleet, 173 Skybridge airplanes, had just stopped, in a matter of minutes. Jordan looked at him and whispered, "You did this, didn't you?" Elias turned, his eyes soft and deep. "Sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to stop it first." She picked up the phone and continued live streaming. The screen lit up. Comments flooded in. "Who is that guy? He just grounded the whole airline. This man's a legend." Voices began to rise in the cabin. Chaos, curiosity, fear. But amidst it all, Elias remained seated, his eyes fixed on the snow-covered runway. There, he saw a reflection of himself, a black man, among hundreds of billion-dollar machines, yet carrying something no system could program: dignity. He closed his eyes gently and whispered as if to himself, "This seat isn't a privilege, it's a promise." The cabin was still silent. Not a comfortable silence, but a thick, heavy silence, like a layer of fog covering the room. No one dared to breathe loudly. The engine had stopped. The lights had turned a pale yellow. No one spoke, just looked around, as if waiting for someone to speak up and tell them what to do. "Doctor." Elias Monroe remained seated in seat 1A. His eyes were turned to the window. The glass reflected the glittering snow and the long strip of runway lights. In that reflection, he saw his own face, calm. But behind those eyes, there was an indescribable undercurrent. He remembered the first time he flew, more than 20 years ago. He had just graduated from college. The economy class ticket was bought with the money he saved from his part-time job. He sat near the window, his hand tightly holding the seat belt, smiling slightly. Next to him was an elderly man with gray hair, who looked at him and said, "First time flying." "Son." Elias nodded, excited. The man smiled. "You'll get used to it. Just remember, the sky doesn't care who you are." He believed that for a long time, until he realized that the people on the ground always wanted to control who was allowed to fly and who was not. A voice over the intercom broke the silence. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a temporary delay in our departure sequence due to a system-wide update. Thank you for your patience. Catherine Blake, Bet Day, Bookboy system-wide update." "You've got to be kidding me. I have a conference in L.A. This is unacceptable." Elias turned and said softly, "Maybe some updates are long overdue." Catherine glared at him, her eyes filled with irritation. "Are you implying this has something to do with you?" Elias smiled, not answering. In the background, Jordan Ellis was still live streaming. Viewers had passed 500,000. Comments were pouring in. "He's calm, but deadly. This is what class looks like under pressure. The whole airline's grounded. Unreal." Jordan looked at Elias through the lens, her eyes a mixture of curiosity and awe. There was something about the way he sat, no rush. No need to prove anything, that made her feel strangely secure. She turned to Melissa and asked softly, "Who is he really?" Melissa replied softly, "I heard he is a major shareholder of the company, but I didn't think he would go this far." Jordan narrowed his eyes. "This may be the first time someone has made the world listen." Elias tilted his head, still watching the snow outside the window. Another memory surfaced in his mind, a rainy day in Houston, when he was a child. He stood next to his mother in a long line at the bus stop. The bus driver stopped, but when he saw them, he shook his head. "Full. Next one." The bus drove away, leaving behind a trail of gray smoke and the strong smell of gasoline. His mother said nothing, just pulled her son back by the hand. She looked at him, her voice strangely calm. "You don't need to be angry. We just have to keep going. One day, they will have to stop." Years later, Elias realized, his mother wasn't talking about buses. She was talking about the world. He sighed softly, his eyes narrowing as the reflected light blurred the image outside. In the virtual noise, a question kept circling in his mind. Am I really changing something? Or just scaring them for a day and then forgetting about tomorrow? Elias bent down and opened his phone. Notifications flooded in. The news was all over social media. Breaking news. All Skybridge flights grounded due to AI system error. Rumors suggest high-level tech exec involved in Flight 703 incident. He gently swiped the screen, not commenting, not denying. Each post was a mirror of how society viewed people like him, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with suspicion, but in both, rarely with understanding. He looked up to see Melissa Carter approaching. She bit her lip, her eyes full of concern. "Mr. Monroe, I need to ask something." Elias nodded. "Go ahead. Did you actually do that? Did you stop the whole system?" He looked at her, his eyes kind and tired at the same time. "I didn't stop it. I just pressed the check button. But when the justice system is truly broken, sometimes stopping it is the only way to fix it." Melissa looked at him for a long time. Then she said softly, barely loud enough for him to hear, "I have seen many people mistreated, but none who have stood up like you." Elias chuckled. "I didn't stand up. I just sat still." She was silent. He turned back to look through the glass. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving only a golden light covering the runway. Catherine was on the phone. Her voice was loud and annoyed. "I don't care what's happening. Just get me another flight. This is insane." Jordan panned the camera. The live stream audience saw it all. The arrogance, the collapse, and the silence of the man in the front seat. A prominent comment pops up. She talks louder. He says less. Guess who's winning? Elias didn't hear the words, but he seemed to feel them. He touched his watch gently, 3 times, soft, slow, his habit. The compartment door opened, and Mark Bennett turned around. His face was pale. "Sir, corporate's on the line. They want to talk to you directly." Elias wasn't surprised. He stood up and gently took the phone from Mark. The voice on the other end of the speaker sounded shaky and worried. "Dr. Monroe, what's going on out there? You've frozen every skybridge operation in the country," he replied, his voice even, neither high nor low. "I didn't freeze anything. Your system did when it stopped recognizing fairness." There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then another voice cut in, low and cold. "You realize the losses this will cause?" Elias replied slowly. "You realize the cost of ignoring this would have been worse." He hung up. Everyone looked at him as if he were some strange phenomenon, a mixture of fear and awe. Catherine turned away, but Melissa just stood there, her eyes still fixed on him, as if she were seeing something that defied all the rules she knew. Elias sat back in his chair. Outside, the sun was up. A brilliant streak of light cut across the snow. He looked through the glass, his eyes calm, but deep within them was a restless anxiety. He knew the world would say many things about this action. Some would praise it, some would criticize it, but he also knew that, amidst all of it, the only thing left was his choice to be silent, but not to back down. An announcement was made on the plane. Due to an ongoing system investigation, all flights remain grounded until further notice. Elias exhaled, his voice low, as if talking to himself. Let them stay grounded. Maybe it's time we all stop pretending to fly. Jordan kept filming, the camera catching the reflection of the glass where Elias's eyes looked out at the world. Not the eyes of a winner, but the eyes of someone who had lost many times, but never given up. She whispered softly, not for the audience to hear, speaking only to herself. "Now I understand. He's not fighting them. He's reminding them what it means to be human." Catherine Blake sat back in her chair, her hands clasped together. Her Prada bag was still resting comfortably on her lap, but her eyes were elsewhere. The light from the window reflected off her plump cheeks, revealing a weariness that few others could see. Since the airline announced the full system shutdown, everyone has been looking at her strangely. Not the admiring looks of staff or the reserved looks of regular passengers, but the looks of people who are witnessing someone's privilege being torn apart right in their hands. Catherine was used to everything opening up when she arrived. Doors, elevators, greetings, smiles all waiting for her. In Catherine's world, no was a word so rare it was almost non-existent. But today, in this tiny cabin, a man sat silently, and his no rocked her world. She looked over at Dr. Elias Monroe, who was still sitting in seat 1A. He was whispering something to Melissa, his voice soft, low, patient. There was nothing cocky about him, not like the powerful men she had met. Not theatrical, not threatening, just steady. And that's what makes Catherine uncomfortable. She turned to Jordan, the young reporter who was still filming. Catherine's voice was hoarse with anger. "What are you doing? Do you have the right to film me?" Jordan didn't take his eyes off the camera. "I'm filming the truth, ma'am. That's all. The truth." Catherine laughed coldly. "Do you think you know anything about the truth in this? That man is destroying an entire airline just for a seat." Jordan raised her head, her eyes calm. "It's not the chair, Mrs. Blake. It's what it means." The words choked Catherine. For a moment, she was unable to reply. Melissa turned and whispered to Catherine, "Madam, please remain calm. The company will make an announcement soon." "Calm down," Catherine gently squeezed the strap of her bag. "Do you know who I am?" Elias looked up. His voice was soft but firm. "Perhaps that is the problem, Mrs. Blake. Too many people know who you are, but no one knows who you are." The whole cabin was silent. Catherine looked at him, her eyes flashing with anger, then gradually softening. She tried to reply, but her words caught. Many years in the media have taught Catherine the power of image. She has staged many human moments to build her business brand. A photo of her crying in front of a hospital, a speech about faith and equal opportunity. But now, looking into Jordan's lens, she suddenly realized that the only image she could not control was her true image. Outside, the snow was still falling. Inside, the plane was silent, save for the loudspeaker announcing that all flights are still grounded. Catherine set her bag down, her hands clasped together. She looked out the window, not to escape, but to find something long lost. A little peace. In her mind, a memory flashed back a summer morning many years ago. She was 23, working as an intern at a television station. An older reporter had once said to her, "Kathy, true power isn't about making people fear you. It's about them choosing to believe you." She had believed it. But the higher she climbed, the more she had learned to scare people. Because fear is faster than belief. And today, in first class, when she saw Elias's calm eyes, she knew that fear no longer convinced anyone. Elias looked over, catching Catherine's eye. He spoke softly, more conversational than confrontational. "Mrs. Blake, I don't want to turn this into a fight. But if those in power keep demanding more space, there won't be any left for others." Catherine pursed her lips, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You don't understand. In my world, if I don't keep my seat, someone else will." Elias nodded. "Maybe. But if everyone thought that, there would be no more room for anyone to sit together." The words seemed to fall straight into her heart. No noise, no anger, just a simple truth, but heavy enough to make her look back at herself. Melissa stood by, silent. She felt like this moment was like a layer of fog clearing, revealing the true self of each person in the cabin. Jordan Quee sang camera. No. Sometimes, it's not about who gets the seat. It's about who deserves to stay. A soft buzz came from Catherine's phone. It was a news alert. She flipped it open, and an image of herself appeared on the screen, a video of her arguing with Elias. With the headline scrolling across it, "VIP passenger claims first-class seat." CEO responds calmly. Dense comments below. She looks entitled. "The calm guy wins this one. Power doesn't need to shout." Catherine looked at the screen for a long time. She felt like a stranger. Outside, the loudspeaker boomed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are conducting a full system review." Elias sat still. He didn't look at the phone, didn't say another word. But to Catherine, the image was like a mirror reflecting back everything she had ever been proud of. Something inside her broke. Not loudly, just a small crack, but enough for her to hear clearly. Jordan lowered the camera and looked at Catherine. "Do you regret it?" Catherine was silent. She looked ahead, where Elias was sitting, and said slowly, "Not regret. It's just that for the first time I felt tired." Jordan nodded, turning off the camera. She knew the feeling, the weariness of realizing she had run too far from her true self. Catherine closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. She no longer cared about schedules or meetings. In that moment, all she wanted was silence. No phone calls, no voices, no power, just silence. Elias was still looking out the window. The early afternoon sun filtered through the gray clouds and fell on his face. In that light, Catherine saw something she had long forgotten, the peace of a man who had no need to prove who he was. For the first time in years. Catherine smiled slightly. Not a media smile, but a real smile. Small, but enough to make the cabin feel lighter. She said softly, her voice very low, "Maybe this seat was never mine to begin with." Elias turned around, his smile warm. "Not at all arrogant. It's everyone's. When respect sits there, too." The cabin lights turned a soft yellow. Outside, the airport was still frozen by a technical problem that no one dared to publicly explain. Hundreds of planes remained on the runway, and Flight 703 was now the center of national attention. De Campi, Elias Monroe leaned back in his chair, his eyes turned outward, the light from his phone screen reflecting off his cheekbones. The news headline continued to fill the room, 173. The Skybridge flight's grounded. The cause is under investigation. Below the article, a picture of him and Catherine Blake appeared, symbolizing two opposing worlds. In the background, Jordan Ellis was still filming, but this time not with the intention of reporting. She was capturing the silent moments, the ones she knew would speak louder than any words. In the dim light, Catherine sat still, her hand gently playing with the strap of her bag. She looked different from a few hours ago, less proud, less hurried, like someone waking from a long dream. Catherine looked at Elias, her voice low. "You know, I've spent my whole life climbing to this position. Every year, every project, every handshake. I used to think I'd fought against every prejudice. But today, looking at you, I realized maybe I'm just repeating the very thing I used to hate." Elias said nothing. He simply inclined his head, his eyes soft but uncompromising. "We are all trapped in the system, Mrs. Blake, except I choose not to keep it running when it is wrong." Catherine smiled faintly. Her voice choked. "And I have lived my whole life to keep it running, no matter how wrong it is, because I am afraid, if it stops, I will lose everything." Elias nodded, looking at her intently. "Sometimes it's stopping that saves us from losing everything." In the compartment, people were still whispering. They had no idea what the two were talking about, but the atmosphere had changed, no longer tense, but one of listening. Melissa approached, holding a glass of water. She gently placed it on the table in front of Elias. "Would you like some water, I think? You might be tired." Elias chuckled. "Thanks. Melissa, are you okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were still filled with a mixture of worry and admiration. "I don't know what's going on out there, but I do know no one has ever brought the entire system to a halt like that before." "Are you really not afraid?" Elias put down his glass of water, his voice as light as a vapor. "Scared. I've always been afraid. But fear doesn't mean silence." Melissa looked at him for a long time, then nodded slightly. In her eyes, what appeared was not only respect, but also a ray of light, the rare light that makes people believe that they can do the right thing, no matter how small. Jordan walked over, put the camera down on the table, and asked, "Do you know you just became the center of national attention?" Elias chuckled. "Not what I wanted, but that's what's happening. People call you the calm storm, the man who stopped 173 planes with 3 touches. What do you think of that?" He was silent for a moment. "Maybe they should call it 3 warnings, one for patience, one for fairness, and one for the belief that things can be better." Jordan nodded, her eyes shining. "You don't realize it. This isn't just about a seat. It's about dignity, and the world is hungry for it more than ever." Elias looked at her, smiling slightly. "If they are really thirsty. Hopefully they won't forget to drink water." Jordan chuckled. "You really are an odd one." A phone rang. Mark Bennett appeared at the door, his face tense. "Dr. Monroe, headquarters wants to talk to you. They're holding an emergency video conference." Elias nodded. "Give me the phone." Mark handed over the tablet. The screen lit up, displaying the face of Henry Wallace, president of Skybridge Air. His face was stern, his voice full of restraint. "Elias, this has gotten out of control. All operations are paralyzed. I need you to restore the system immediately." Elias looked straight at the screen. "Henry, I didn't stop it. The system responded correctly to the safety check. It just detected something you didn't want to see." Henry frowned. "What access allocation? Prioritization based on customer profile, not security or order. Algorithms are biased by the data humans provide." Henry was silent. The others in the video conference looked at each other. "Another man," interjected Elias. "If you go public with this, the stock price will collapse." Elias replied slowly, each word cutting through space. "If I keep silent, human dignity will collapse. The air is heavy." Henry sighed. "You know I respect you, Elias, but I must ask you to restore the system. Now." Elias looked into the camera, his voice low and clear. "I will restore it, but only if Skybridge commits to fixing the problem, not just in the software, but in the way it treats itself." Henry was silent for a few seconds. "Finally," he said softly, "you're backing me into a corner. Monroe." "No." "Henry," replied Elias, "I am opening a door. Connection off. Screen black." Catherine looked at him, her voice soft. "You know, I think today, it's not just the airline that's been grounded. It's me, too." Elias tilted his head, his eyes gentle. "Stopping is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning." She nodded. The statement made her feel better, not because it was great, but because it was true. Melissa looked around the cabin, then said softly, "I have never seen anyone make others listen by being silent like you." Elias smiled, his eyes quiet. "Sometimes silence is the only way to let your voice be heard." Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The runway lights were coming on. Inside the cabin, everyone felt a change. Not big, not loud, but very real. Catherine clenched her fists, looking at Elias. "Maybe we should start over." Elias nodded. "I think today is a good day to do that." Jordan lifted the camera. The light from the lens reflected off the faces of two people, one who had once held power, one who was using power to stop it, and between them, a small space of trust. In the silence, Jordan's voice rang out softly, like the finale of her newscast today. A seat was contested, a flight was grounded, but perhaps, for the first time in years, the world began to listen. The lights in the cabin dimmed. Elias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Outside, the sky gradually cleared, and in the silence, someone whispered, 3 touches. Sometimes that's all the world needs to remember it's still human. The next morning, America woke up to the same story. On every newscast, on every social media channel, the image of the black man sitting quietly in seat 1A appeared densely. In a small coffee shop in Seattle, 2 middle-aged men were watching TV. One of them pointed and said, "See," that he just sat there and brought down the whole airline. The other man sipped his coffee and nodded. Not collapsed, just forced to stop. And sometimes, stopping is the best thing. Within hours, the name Dr. Elias Monroe was trending. The hashtag #3taps was spreading across social media. Millions of people were talking, sharing, and debating. A tweet shared more than 2 million times. He didn't shout, he didn't fight, he just reminded the world what respect looks like. Another wrote his 3 taps stopped 173 planes. But what really stopped was our silence in the face of injustice. Meanwhile, at Skybridge Air's Manhattan office, another storm was brewing. The 42nd floor conference room was filled with phone calls, emails, and interview requests. Chairman Henry Wallace sat in the middle of the conference table, watching the screen display minute-by-minute damage estimates. His voice was hoarse and deep. "We are not just dealing with a technical problem. This is a moral crisis. We can issue a statement that the system failed and that no individual was involved," a PR consultant said quickly. Henry looked at him, his eyes cold. "Do you think lying now will save us? No. We are not down because of the system. We are down because of the way we treat people." The room was silent. On the other side of the country, Elias sat in his office at Next Aero Systems. Behind him, glass windows looked out onto the San Francisco skyline, the hazy sky reflecting a pale yellow light. Dozens of emails, text messages, and interview requests littered the desk. Some called him a hero, others a saboteur. Jordan Ellis had just flown in from New York. She walked in, an old video camera in her hand. "You know, I just read over 5,000 comments on yesterday's video. I'm not surprised." Elias smiled. The internet loves clear stories, good guys, bad guys, and an understandable victory. Jordan sat down, her eyes flashing with concern. "But it's not that obvious, is it?" Elias looked away. "No, never. The world is not black or white. It is shades of gray, something people don't want to look at for long, because it makes them think." Jordan nodded thoughtfully. She turned on the camera and set it in front of him. "I wanted to do an interview, not to add to your praise, but to make people understand why you did it." Elias was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "I don't do it to be understood. I do it because I can't keep silent anymore. And they, if they want to understand, will have to ask themselves what would they do if they were sitting in that chair." The sentence echoed softly but deeply, like a knife cutting through the noise of the outside world. Meanwhile, in New York, Catherine Blake closed her office. She received hundreds of calls, emails, and a lot of criticism. One major newspaper called her a symbol of blind privilege. She sat in front of the mirror, looking at herself. Not the powerful woman on the cover of a magazine, but the tired face of someone relearning an old lesson, the lesson of humility. The phone rang. It was Elias. She hesitated, then picked up. "Are you okay?" His voice was light as air. Catherine chuckled. "I don't think I was ever okay. Until this happened." Elias was silent. Catherine continued. "Yesterday, I hated you. Today, I thank you. Perhaps I need someone like you to reflect on myself. Not me," he replied softly. "It was that moment. It taught us both something." She nodded. Tears fell as lightly as mist, not tears of regret, but of recognition. That evening, the TV news broadcast the interview between Elias and Jordan Liv. The whole country watched. Jordan looked straight into the camera and began slowly, "Mr. Monroe, millions of people call you a hero. Do you consider yourself a hero?" Elias smiled, his eyes gentle and bright, I think. "True heroes are those who dare to face their own mistakes. I am just the one who reminds them to look back." Jordan continued, "Do you think this will change the world?" Elias replied. "If it made just one person sit still and listen before judging, then perhaps the world would change a little." In that moment, the studio fell silent. No music, no effects, just a man speaking with his real voice in a world accustomed to noise. In a small Chicago apartment, a young black boy was watching a show with his mother. "Mommy, why isn't he screaming?" he asked. The mother stroked her child's hair and said softly, "Because sometimes you don't need to shout for others to hear. You just need to be right." The boy smiled, sat up straight, his eyes sparkling. That image spread across the country, like a small seed of hope. The next morning, Skybridge Air held a press conference. President Henry Wallace stood before hundreds of reporters. His voice was calm but heavy. "Yesterday, our system stopped, but it was not the fault of the technology. It was human error. From today, Skybridge is committed to restructuring the entire service policy and retraining the entire system." We also officially invited Dr. Elias Monroe, to be an independent consultant for the Human First Initiative program. The conference room erupted in applause. Jordan, standing in the press row, smiled. In the front row, Elias sat silently. He did not clap. He just looked up at the podium, his eyes deep, calm, and peaceful. He knew this was only the first step, but perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt the world was truly moving, not because of power, but because of conscience. That night, as the city fell silent, Elias sat in his office, the lamplight reflecting off the wooden desk. He opened his laptop, looking at the last messages of the day. A message appeared, without a subject, from Catherine Blake. There was only one short sentence in the letter. I learned to sit still. Thanks for making me stop. Elias smiled. He turned off the engine, leaned back in his chair, and looked out at the starry sky. From afar, the sound of an airplane engine rang out, soft and steady. This time, he felt neither anger nor fear, only peace, because he knew that sometimes the world had to stop so it could fly higher. A week has passed since the skies of the United States were frozen by 3 touches by Dr. Elias Monroe. Skybridge Air has fully resumed operations. On the surface, everything seems to be back to normal, but in the heart of society, there are still silent waves spreading. Major newspapers called the event "The Day the Sky Stood Still." Some saw Elias as a symbol of justice. Others called him a man who played the system. And in between, millions remained silent. In a small cafe in Brooklyn, a group of students were reviewing the video. The curly-haired girl chuckled. "I think he's so calm. He doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove anything. But he still makes people listen." The friend next to him shrugged. "That's good. But if everyone did that, society would be in chaos. He has power. He has shares. That's why he can do it." The girl looked at her friend and asked again, "So you mean if you don't have power, you should just let people trample on you?" He was silent. A second of silence between the two of them, heavier than the noise outside. Elias' story not only touches the heart, it forces people to face themselves. At the next Aero Systems office, Elias sat in a conference room, surrounded by his senior management team. They talked about the future, about cooperation, about shareholder pressure. But there was something in their voices that made Elias feel alienated. A middle-aged man in the group said, "We are getting attention. This is a golden opportunity to expand our brand. Newspapers, television, even Hollywood want to buy the rights to the story. I think we should take advantage of it." Elias was silent for a few seconds. He looked around the room, the expectant faces, the calculating eyes. Then he said softly, "Do you know why I sat still that day?" Everyone was silent. Elias looked straight at them, his voice low and steady. "Not to be famous, not to win. I did it because I was tired of people only acting when the camera was on them." The room fell silent. One man coughed. Another bowed his head. Elias continued, more slowly, "If we brand justice, it dies, and I do not intend to bury it with my hands." He stood up and walked out of the room. No one dared say another word. That afternoon, Elias stopped by a small park on the outskirts of San Francisco. Children were playing, adults were reading. A brown-skinned girl sat drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. When she saw him, she looked up and smiled brightly. "Are you the one in the video?" Elias sat down, smiling. "Maybe it was me." "How did you know?" The little girl tilted her head and replied naturally, "My dad said you were teaching adults how to behave. I thought you were just sitting there, but the whole world stopped." Elias smiled gently. "Do you know why they stopped?" The girl thought, then said softly, "Because they feel ashamed." He was silent. The answer touched him. Children understand what adults often avoid, that silence is sometimes the clearest mirror. He looked out to the horizon, where the sunset dyed the sky golden. In that moment, Elias felt truly at peace, not because he had won, but because he knew there were people who understood. Meanwhile, in New York, Catherine Blake stepped up to the podium at a national media conference. The room fell silent as she said, "Last week, I sat on a plane and argued for a seat I thought I deserved. But I was wrong. I didn't deserve it. Not because I didn't have the money, but because I forgot one thing: the seat doesn't define who you are." Everyone looked at her, silent. She continued, her voice firm. "We, those in power, have become so accustomed to being given priority that we have forgotten that respect is not a privilege, but an obligation. And today, I want to thank the person who reminded me of that Dr. Elias Monroe." Hundreds of people in the auditorium stood up and applauded. The light fell on Catherine's face, bright and warm. She smiled, no longer the proud woman on the plane that day, but a person who had just found herself again. Night falls, in her small apartment. Jordan Ellis sits at her computer screen, editing her latest video, "The Day Planes Stopped Moving." She adds a final line, her voice as light as the wind. They say Elias Monroe stopped 173 planes, but perhaps what he really stopped was the habit of closing our eyes to injustice. And perhaps, in that moment, we learned to sit still, not to surrender, but to see each other. She pressed the upload button. The screen lit up. Within minutes, thousands of views appeared. The first comment came from an anonymous account that I was a passenger on Flight 703. I saw it all, and for the first time, I saw that people really can change. Jordan finished reading, leaned back in his chair, and smiled slightly. The next morning, Elias walked into his usual coffee shop. The waitress handed him a cup of black coffee and smiled. "Dr. Monroe, today is our coffee. Thank you for what you did." He nodded, thanking him. As he was about to leave, a young man stopped him. His face was stiff, his voice hoarse. "Who do you think you are to make hundreds of people miss their flights, lose their jobs, and delay their surgeries?" The atmosphere in the shop fell. Ellis looked straight into his eyes, his voice low and slow. "I don't think I'm anyone. I just think, if the system makes a person look down on, then it's worth stopping, even if it's just for a day." The man was silent. His eyes softened. He nodded and left quietly. Elias watched, then returned to his coffee. He took a small sip, closed his eyes, and exhaled slowly. It tasted bitter, but warm, like the journey he was on, not sweet, but real. That evening, Elias returned home. He opened the window, letting in the night breeze. Across the city, the airport lights twinkled. Planes took off again, soaring into the dark sky. He whispered to himself, "No one can stop the sky forever, but sometimes, just one day of stopping is enough for people to learn how to fly in the right direction." Outside, the sky is quiet, but in the hearts of millions, something is moving. 2 weeks after the day the sky stopped, the world has started moving again. But somewhere, in press conferences, editorials, or in the hearts of those who witnessed it, the echoes of the 3 collisions have not faded. Dr. Elias Monroe became a household name, but that didn't make him comfortable. He wasn't born to be an econ. He just wanted to live as a human being, to work, to listen, and to walk the right path. That morning, he walked into the office, where everyone stood up to greet him, eyes full of admiration. A young employee handed him a copy of Time magazine, the cover of which had his picture and the words in large letters, "The Man Who Grounded the Sky." Elias looked at the cover of the newspaper and smiled slightly. He said softly, "Actually, I didn't stop the sky. I just touched something that should have been touched a long time ago." The clerk smiled, but didn't understand what he meant. In her eyes, he was a hero. In his eyes, he was just a lucky man who had heard his conscience. That afternoon, Elias was invited to an international aerospace technology conference in Washington, D.C. It was where the industry's biggest influencers gathered: CEOs, investors, politicians. He arrived a little late. As he entered the auditorium, hundreds of cameras were focused on him. The host, a silver-haired MC, smiled and said, "We are honored today to have Dr. Elias Monroe, a man who makes the world look again at how humans and technology coexist." Applause broke out. Elias stepped onto the stage, the lights illuminating his face, gentle and calm. He took the microphone, his voice low. "I don't think I should be here as a hero. I'm just a witness to what happens when the system forgets that it was created to serve people." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then he continued, "Technology isn't wrong. The people who programmed it are. And the most dangerous thing isn't error. It's indifference. When we let indifference become the norm, then error becomes the rule." The room fell silent. Some bowed their heads. Others nodded. The first person to stand and applaud was Henry Wallace, president of Skybridge Air. He shook Elias's hand, his voice choking. "You've reminded me of something I'd forgotten. We don't fly planes. We fly people." Elias shook hands and replied, "And that means, before we take off, we must learn to land in each other's arms first." The entire auditorium erupted in applause. The camera captured the moment. Two people who had been on opposite sides of the conflict, now standing together on stage. But not everyone was happy. On another floor, in a private office, other powerful figures were conferring. A man in a dark suit whispered, "Monroe is becoming an icon. If he continues, the old rules will crumble. We cannot let that happen." Another replied, "We can quiet him down. No need to make a fuss. Just take away his space." Plans were drawn out on the table, silent and cold. That evening, Elias sat alone in his apartment. Outside the window, the city lights reflected on the wall. He opened his laptop and received a series of notifications. Several cooperation contracts were suspended. Several speaking invitations were abruptly canceled. He knew what was going on, but he didn't show any concern. Instead, he poured himself a cup of hot tea, sat down on the sofa, and called Jordan Ellis. Jordan replied, her voice a little urgent. "You heard the news, right? They're trying to bring you down." Ellis smiled, his voice calm. "They can't drown a man who doesn't swim in glory. Jordan, I don't climb up, so how can they pull me down?" Jordan was silent for a few seconds. She understood that, while the world was in panic, he had retained what everyone else had lost: silence. The next day, Elias was invited to appear on a major television program. The famous host, Linda Fox, asked a pointed question. "Dr. Monroe, do you think what you did was right, even though it left thousands of people stranded at the airport? Are you being too extreme?" Elias looked at her, his eyes straight and calm. "Sometimes, to move forward, the world has to stop. I don't stop because I'm angry. I stop because I love this world enough to want it to be better." Linda was about to ask more, but the audience applauded. The comment spread like a small, warm, but powerful flame across social media. A comment line appeared below the video. "When one dares to stop to correct, it is not weakness, it is courage." Late at night, Elias returned home. The doorbell rang. He opened it. It was Catherine Blake. She stood there in a long coat, her face tired, but her eyes bright. "I had just left a TV interview. They asked me if I had any regrets. I said yes, but not because I had lost face, but because it had taken so many years to learn how to be a human being." Elias looked at her, nodding slightly. "And now you're learning again, very quickly." They both laughed, soft but real. She came in, and they sat at the table, sharing a simple dinner: soup, bread, and a few stories that needed no explanation. "You know," Catherine said softly, "I still think about that moment. If you had been angry that day, I would never have changed." Elias smiled. "I was angry, but I understand. Anger only makes me more like them, and silence makes them listen to themselves." After dinner, Catherine left. Elias stood at the window, watching her disappear into the streetlights. He exhaled, then opened his phone, and saw a message from Henry Wallace. "Thanks for making me believe that ethics still have a place in business. Keep it up, Monroe. Whatever they do." He read, then nodded slightly. Outside, the sound of planes echoed through the night sky again. This time, the sound was not one of power or movement, but of breathing natural, peaceful. Elias spoke softly, his voice low but warm. "The sky has learned to breathe. Perhaps, eventually, humans will too." He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, with only the moonlight reflecting through the glass window. A moment of silence in a noisy world. An ordinary man, but he made the whole sky stop with just 3 touches. A month has passed since the sky stopped. The story of Dr. Elias Monroe is still hot, but no longer loud. It has subsided, like the ashes of a fire that has burned long enough to leave a warmth. Elias lived a quieter life. He returned to his job at Next Arrow Systems, avoiding interviews, paid speeches, and celebrity parties. He didn't want to become a catchphrase. One morning, while he was making coffee in his office, Jordan Ellis walked in, a newspaper in her hand. Her face looked serious. "Elias, have you read this?" He put down his coffee cup and looked at the newspaper. On the front page was a large headline, "Next Arrow accused of manipulating flight safety data." Elias took the newspaper and read it slowly, word by word. He said nothing for a few seconds, just closed his eyes. His voice dropped. They finally did something. Jordan looked at him, worried. "Who do you think is behind this?" Elias chuckled. "Those who do not want the world to change, because when the world begins to see, darkness loses its power." At noon, the news was all over the TV channels. The anchor said in a serious tone, "Dr. Elias Monroe's company, Next Arrow Systems, is under investigation for data manipulation. Many people are questioning whether the man who grounded 173 planes is really as clean as the image he has built." Social media exploded. Praise turned to doubt, then to criticism. Someone wrote, "Maybe he is no different from others, just playing morality to gain fame." Jordan called Elias. "You have to react now. If you don't, they'll redefine the story." Elias sat in his room, the light from the window falling on his face. He spoke slowly, almost in a whisper. "I will not argue with words. I will let the facts speak." The words made Jordan choke. She knew he wouldn't take the easy way out. He would be silent, the way he had once stopped the world. 2 days later, a group of reporters showed up outside Next Arrow headquarters. They shouted questions, flashbulbs flashing. Elias stepped out, his demeanor calm. He paused for a few seconds before getting into his car, then said, "There is no such thing as immoral technology, only how people operate it. I am not afraid of scrutiny, because if light can hurt me, it means I am still human." The video went viral in just a few hours. Millions watched, shared, and discussed it. But this time, no one could deny the fact that he kept the most important thing, his composure. Meanwhile, in another Washington building, a closed-door meeting was taking place. A man in a gray suit whispered to a colleague, "He's still standing. We need a bigger hit, not on the company, on the man." The plan was laid a series of anonymous posts. Rumors spread quickly, and strange calls began coming in the middle of the night. Elias knew everything, but he didn't react. He continued working, walked home as usual, stopped at the same coffee shop, smiled at strangers. One evening, as he was walking down a side street, A man stepped out of the shadows and blocked his way. His voice was hoarse. "Mr. Monroe, people say you are a hero. I see you are just a show-off." Elias looked straight into the man's eyes, his voice low and calm. "If you think I'm looking for attention, then you've never seen a person who actually wants to change anything." He said no more. Perhaps it was because of that look. No anger, only rock-solid faith. He turned away, leaving Elias alone in the empty street. The next morning, Jordan brought him a USB drive. "You have to see this." She turned on the screen. It was Skybridge Air's internal log. An engineer confessed that someone had deliberately edited the data to blame Next Arrow. Jordan exhaled. "We have proof. But if we make it public, they will attack harder." Elias sat silently for a moment. Then he said, "Jordan, justice does not need to be safe. It needs to be seen." She nodded, her eyes lighting up. That afternoon, the video was released. Major news outlets covered it. The truth was proven. Skybridge had to publicly apologize, and those behind it were investigated. The whole country breathed a sigh of relief. But what was more remarkable was not the victory. It was how Elias dealt with it. He made no statement, no press conference. He posted just one line on his personal page. "The truth is not for winning. It is for setting free." That status line became a quote shared millions of times. And it seemed to touch the deepest part of the human heart, the belief that no matter how deceitful the world is, light can still find a crack to enter. A week later, Elias received a call from Henry Wallace. Henry's voice was trembling. "Elias, I owe you a thank you. You did what an entire industry was afraid to do, face yourself." Elias replied, "Henry, I only stop when necessary. Now it's time for us to continue flying. But this time, no one will be left behind." They both laughed. No need for further words. That evening, Elias sat on the balcony, looking out at the night sky, the sound of planes whizzing overhead, lights flashing against the black sky. He remembered it all. The moment on Flight 703, the conversation with Catherine. Melissa's look, Jordan's voice, and the long unheard silences. He realized that what changes the world is not loud actions, but the moments when people stop to really listen to each other. A gentle breeze blew by. He smiled and whispered, 3 touches, 1 for courage, 1 for truth, and 1 for faith. I hope the world will not forget." Below, the city was still glowing. But in that small apartment, there was a gentle silence, like the sky after a storm. 3 months after the day, the sky stood still. America calmed down. News about Dr. Elias Monroe gradually became less frequent. He refused to appear on talk shows, write books, or give speeches. People thought he had retired. But in fact, he had simply chosen a different way to survive, through silence. Elias lives a simple life in a small house on the outskirts of San Francisco. Every morning, he brews a cup of black coffee, opens the windows to let in the breeze, and writes a few notes in a notebook. The house is always quiet, except for the ticking of a clock and the distant sound of a plane. One morning, Jordan Ellis stopped by. She had a small camera and her familiar smile. "Are you still avoiding the media?" she said, half joking. Elias smiled, sipping his coffee. "I didn't hide. I just chose a quieter place to listen." Jordan sat down, looking at him thoughtfully. "You know, the world out there is still talking about you. Some call you a legend. Some say you disappeared because you were scared." Elias looked out the window, where sunlight filtered through the trees. "I didn't disappear. Jordan, I just thought, after the storm, not everyone needs a hero. They need to learn to stand up for themselves." Jordan was silent. The words made her choke up because they weren't modesty. They were a message. A week later, Elias received a letter from a high school in Texas. A student named Marcus Hill, 16 years old, wrote, "Mr. Monroe, I watch your videos every day. I don't understand everything, but I feel calmer when I see you don't yell, even when people are wrong. How can I be calm like that?" Elias read the letter over and over again. He sat still for a long time, then took a pen and wrote a reply. "Marcus, being calm doesn't mean not being afraid. It means knowing what's worth being afraid of and what's not. When you understand that, you won't need to scream." He sent the letter, not expecting a reply. But a few days later, the postman brought another, thicker envelope. It contained dozens of letters from students from all over Ohio, Seattle, Chicago, Boston, all writing about their feelings while watching the video. 3 touches. Someone wrote, "I told my mom that there was a person who won without hitting anyone." One child wrote, "I was bullied, but because of your story, I chose to stay quiet and not let anger control me." And strangely enough, they stopped. Elias folded the letters and placed them on the table. A small smile crossed his face. He understood. This was why he didn't need to go on stage. One late afternoon, Catherine Blake visited. She was dressed more simply than before, her silver hair cut short, her smile gentle. "Do you know you made me a speaker?" she said, pouring tea and laughing. Elias looked at her, eyebrows raised slightly. "I thought you hated the stage." Catherine chuckled. "I used to, but now, I tell our story to young people. I tell them that sometimes failure is the only way to learn humility." Elias was silent, his eyes as gentle as the light on the porch. "You are not defeated, Catherine. You are only awakened. An awakening is always the best victory." They sat for a long time without saying anything more. In that silence, 2 people, once on opposite sides, now shared a rare peace. Meanwhile, in New York, Jordan was editing a documentary about Elias. She called it "When Silence Speaks." In the studio, she picked out every sound, every pause, every breath of Elias. When the editor asked, "Would you like some background music? It would make it more interesting," Jordan smiled and shook his head. "No, let the silence speak. It is the silence that makes people listen." The film was broadcast online, without advertising, without sensational headlines. Yet in just 2 weeks, it had more than 50 million views. People did not watch it for entertainment, but to feel it, because in a noisy world, one person sitting still can make the whole world quiet down. One evening, Elias received a text message from Jordan. "The show is on. Have you seen it?" He replied briefly, "I saw it. It was beautiful. But what I liked best were the minutes when no one said anything." Jordan sent back a smiley face. She knew he meant it. A few days later, a university in Atlanta invited Elias to speak. He was about to decline, but this time Jordan was persuasive. "They don't need a speech. They just want you to sit there and talk about silence with them. Just come." Elias agreed. The auditorium was packed that day. Students, lecturers, and even the media were present. When he stepped onto the stage, he had no writing or PowerPoint. It was just him, a chair, and a microphone. He sat down, looked at the audience, and said slowly, "I didn't come here to teach you anything. I just wanted to tell you about silence." He paused for a few seconds, letting the noise die down. Silence is not weakness. It is strength. In this world, people talk too much and listen too little. But when you are truly silent, you hear more, even your own voice. No one said anything. A silence fell. Then a student stood up and asked, "Mr. Monroe, if silence is seen as weakness, are you afraid of being misunderstood?" Elias looked at the student, his voice warm. "I used to be afraid, but then I realized being misunderstood is not as dangerous as being untrue to yourself. When you know you are doing the right thing, silence is also the strongest response. The whole hall applauded, not loudly, but resoundingly. Many bowed their heads, many shed tears. They didn't know why, but they felt like something very real had just touched them. As the talk ended, a young girl approached Elias, her eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Monroe, I just want to say, thank you for teaching me to believe that kindness still has a place in this world." Elias smiled. "No, girl, I didn't teach you that. You've gained your confidence. I'm just reminding you." She bowed her head, then turned away. Elias watched, his eyes silent but bright. That night, he returned to the hotel. The city outside was lit up. The line of cars stretched out like the veins of a living body. He sat by the window, writing a few last lines in his notebook. "People ask me why I keep silent. I think silence is not to escape. It is to listen to the most important thing, the person inside us." He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the sky was black and glittering with stars, and amidst all the noise, a silence spread, beginning in one's own heart. The morning in San Francisco opened in a thick fog like smoke. Rays of sunlight filtered through, touching the glass windows. "Doctor?" Elias Monroe sat on a wooden chair on the porch, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He was used to this silence. No more cameras, no more reporters, no more calls of hero or rebel, only the sound of the wind and his own breathing. Inside the house, the radio played the morning news. A female voice read, "Today marks 1 year since the Triple Touch incident. Many call it the moment that changed the history of aviation." Elias smiled slightly. A year since he had sat still on Flight 703, touching down 3 times and stopping the sky. The world had moved on, but to him, it all seemed like yesterday. At noon, Jordan Ellis arrived. She no longer had her camera, just a small paper bag and 2 boxes of cookies. "Are you still living like a hermit?" she said, entering and looking around the quiet house. Elias smiled, setting down his coffee cup. "I'm not hiding. I'm just slowing down a bit." Jordan sat down across from him, opened the box, and the cinnamon scent wafted out. "I just got back from Atlanta. The movie, When Silence Speaks, was shown at the university. The students gave it a 10-minute standing ovation. They said you taught them how to be brave without screaming." Elias shook his head, his eyes gentle. "No one can teach anyone that. They just need to see it in themselves. I am just the mirror." Jordan was silent, then placed an envelope on the table. "Someone wants to see you. He's a professor at Harvard. They're holding a panel discussion on ethics and technology and want you to speak." Elias touched the envelope lightly, without opening it. "I don't know if I have anything more to say." Jordan tilted his head to look at him. "You don't need to say anything new. Just remind them of the old, that technology can't save humanity. Only people can do that." Elias smiled slightly, not answering. He looked out the window, where the sky was gradually clearing. In the afternoon, Elias walked along the shore of the bay. The water reflected the sunlight. Small waves lapping at the wooden footbridge. Joggers passed by, a few of them recognizing him, but smiling instead of asking for a photo. He felt lighter than ever. A boy of about 10 years old sat on a bench, trying to put together a toy airplane. The wing was broken. Elias stopped and asked, "Do you need help?" The boy looked up, his eyes lighting up when he recognized him. "You're the guy from the internet, right? The guy who stopped the plane." Elias smiled gently. "Maybe it's me, but today I only know how to fix toys." He sat down and helped the boy put the wing back together. A few minutes later, the model was complete. The boy smiled brightly. "Thank you, Uncle. It can fly again." Elias looked at the little plane and said softly, "Sometimes, to make it fly again, you have to stop and fix it." The boy nodded. but perhaps not fully understanding. Elias stood up, patted him on the shoulder, and continued walking. Late in the afternoon, when he got home, he found a white envelope on his doorstep. No address, no sender. He opened it, and inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Monroe, I am an engineer who participated in the development of the Skybridge system. After your event, I quit my job. I came back today because I wanted to correct my mistakes. Thank you for stopping me in time. Elias held the letter for a long time. He knew that real change did not come from the stage or politics. It came from ordinary people who dared to look at themselves. That evening, he received a call from Catherine Blake. Her voice was as warm and strong as ever. Elias, I just left the conference in Chicago. They still ask about you. They want you back in the industry. Elias laughed. You know, I'm not good at politics. Catherine laughed. Nobody needs you in politics. They just need a real person, and the world is missing that. He was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, Catherine, remember, I said that stopping is not the end. Maybe now, it is my turn to start over. She laughed into the phone. And I guess you'll start with something very quiet. Maybe, he replied, his voice as light as a breath. The next day, Elias flew to Boston. For the first time in almost a year, he walked into the airport as a regular passenger. No one stopped him. No one took his seat. No cameras. When the flight attendant smiled and asked, What would you like to drink? He simply replied, A glass of water, thank you. The window outside opened up to a vast sky. As the plane took off, he felt a strange feeling. Not fear, not glory, but true freedom. When the plane reached a stable altitude, he took a small notebook from his pocket and wrote a few lines. The day I stopped the sky, I thought I was changing the world. But today, as I sit in the sky, I understand. I am just learning to listen. He looked out the window, saw the sun reflected on the clouds, and in that moment, he understood. Not all change requires noise. Sometimes, just someone dares to be silent long enough. The world will find its rhythm again. That evening, hundreds of students waited in Harvard Hall. When Elias stepped onto the stage, there was no music, no bright lights, just him and a microphone. He began with a smile. I don't have a lecture. I have a question. Have you ever wondered what makes an airplane fly? One student replied. It is the lifting force. Elias nodded. Yes, but there's more to it than that. It's a balance between gravity pulling down and lift, pushing up, and humans are no different. We need both something to keep us grounded and something to keep us aloft. When one is missing, we fall. He paused, looking at the silent audience. Justice is not something someone else hands you. It is something you hold on to, even when the winds are strongest. No one said anything, but every eye lit up. When the talk was over, Elias stepped outside, the Boston night sky stretching overhead. The wind was cold, but pleasant. He looked up at the stars. A student ran after him and shouted, Dr. Monroe, if you had done nothing that day, would the world have changed? Elias turned back, smiling slightly. No, maybe not. But I think, if I don't do anything, I won't be myself anymore. The student nodded, then fell silent. Elias watched, his eyes gentle. Overhead, a plane passed by, leaving a long trail of light in the dark sky. Elias whispered softly, as if talking to himself, Fly, but don't forget to stop sometimes, to remember where you started. The sky was vast, but in his heart, there was a strangely beautiful silence. A man who had once grounded 173 planes, now just sat watching one fly by and smiled peacefully. The world that year entered a strange period of instability. There was no war, no natural disaster, but there were invisible storms. Of the human heart, fake news was rampant. Trust was a luxury, and technology was developing faster than people could understand themselves. Dr. Elias Monroe still lives quietly in his Bayside home. He is no longer in the public eye, but his ideas have begun to creep into textbooks, lectures, and even everyday conversation. The 3 touches is no longer an event, but a concept, a symbol of the moment when one must pause before reacting, before judging. One morning, Jordan Ellis drove up. She looked tired, her eyes dark from lack of sleep. "Have you seen the news?" she asked, turning on her laptop. "On the screen." Major news agencies were broadcasting continuously. Skybridge's global positioning system suffered a widespread failure, disrupting hundreds of flights. Elias looked at the screen, his forehead furrowing slightly. What did they say the reason was? Nobody knows. Jordan sighed. But the government is convening an independent panel of experts. They want you to be involved. Elias was silent, just looking out the window. The morning light reflected on his face, quiet and deep. "I thought they had enough good people." "Good. Yes. But no one has your vision," Jordan replied. "They don't need technique. They need faith." Elias looked at her, then nodded slightly. 3 days later, he was in Washington. An emergency meeting was being held at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters. The room was packed, the atmosphere tense. An engineer stood up, his voice trembling. The navigation system encountered a synchronization error, but it wasn't a hardware error. It seems like the automatic update conflicted, causing the entire system to shut down to avoid crashing. Another asked, "How soon can we restart?" "I don't know. Every time I try to boot it up, the system automatically goes into sleep mode. It's like it's protecting itself." Everyone was talking loudly. Elias sat quietly, watching the network map flash on the screen. Then he said slowly, "Maybe the system isn't broken. It's just doing what we forgot to do, stopping before it goes wrong." The room fell silent. A general's voice rang out, half surprised, half annoyed. "You mean the system has consciousness?" "No," Elias replied calmly. "But we programmed it with human principles. And if those principles include stopping when it exceeds a safety threshold, then perhaps it is doing exactly what we wanted it to." No one said anything more. The atmosphere was heavy and heavy. Elias turned to Jordan and whispered, "They built a machine that knows when to be quiet, and now they're scared because it's doing it." The news spread quickly. Global shutdown. They called it. Planes grounded. Cargo ships stalled. Supply chains were in disarray. But the strange thing was, during the days of silence, there were no air accidents, not a single collision, not a single emergency. A new wave emerged on social media. The hashtag #YearLetItPause went viral. People began sharing photos of themselves pausing work, turning off their phones, sitting quietly with their families, watching the sunset. It was as if the world was learning to breathe again. In a closed-door meeting, a senior official told Elias, "We need you to reboot the system. The whole economy is paralyzed. We cannot let this continue." Elias looked at him, then asked softly, "Do you want me to restart it? Or do you want me to make it stop protecting itself?" The other man was silent. Elias stood up, his voice calm. "We created technology to work nonstop, and then forced ourselves to live by it. Perhaps now it is teaching us the opposite. Let it stop, at least until we understand why we fear silence so much." The meeting ended in silence. That evening, Elias went out alone. He walked along the Potomac River, the cold wind blowing, the water reflecting the pale moonlight. Jordan called, but he didn't answer. He just sat on the bench, looking at the sky, where no planes were flying. It was absolutely still. He recalled the feeling on that flight, when the whole cabin was dead silent, except for the sound of his heartbeat. When people were forced to face each other without names or class. He whispered to himself, "Perhaps. This world is learning my last lesson." 3 days later, The government announced that the system had successfully rebooted, but with a new procedure. Whenever a risk was detected, the system would automatically stop for 15 minutes so that a human could check it again. A forced downtime mechanism designed by Elias as a consultant. The press called it the Monroe Rule. And strangely enough, no one objected. It seemed that after that incident, everyone understood sometimes. Stopping doesn't waste time. It saves the future. 2 months later, Elias returned to San Francisco. Jordan came to visit, bringing a folder of documents. See, the Monroe Rule has been applied to medicine, energy, even education. Schools are teaching students about pause. You're becoming a philosophy of life. Elias smiled. Philosophy is not important, Jordan. What is important is that people begin to remember how to breathe. Jordan looked at him, her eyes softening. You know, sometimes I think the world needs more Elias Monroe. He shook his head slightly. No, Jordan, the world just needs more people to stop. That evening, the two of them sat by the beach. The sun set slowly, spreading a red and purple hue across the water. The sound of the waves was steady, and the salty wind blew through their hair. Elias looked at the horizon and spoke slowly. I used to think power was about making things move. Now I understand. True power is about making the world stop at the right time. Jordan turned to him, smiling peacefully. You made the sky stop once, and this time you made the world stop. Elias did not reply. He only touched the sand lightly with his hand. 3 times gently, 1, 2, 3. Then he smiled, a gentle, simple smile, as if he knew that he had left behind the most important thing, not an echo, but a silence in the human mind. In the sky, a plane flew by, leaving a long trail of light. But this time, no one was afraid of it stopping, because now the whole world had learned what he had taught, that sometimes just stopping for a moment is enough to make everything better. 5 years after the world learned to stop, the name Dr. Elias Monroe no longer appears frequently in the press. He disappears from all events, refuses all interviews, does not accept any awards. People call him the man who withdrew from the world after changing it. But strangely, while he disappeared, his influence did not. Everywhere, from tech companies in Silicon Valley to elementary schools in the Midwest, the Monroe Rule has become part of the culture. At a Seattle high school, students spend 5 minutes every Monday morning pausing, no phones, no music, no talking, just silence to listen to themselves. The principal reports that student conflict has dropped by more than 60%. At a major New York hospital, doctors are required to take a 30-second Monroe pause before each surgery to ensure they are truly present in the moment. Before, said one doctor, I only saw patients as operations. Now I see them as people. The world changes, not because someone orders it to, but because people begin to feel peace when they stop. One autumn afternoon, Jordan Ellis drove to the California suburbs. She stopped in front of the familiar little house by the bay. The door was ajar. She stepped inside and called softly, Elias, I brought you some mint tea like you like. No one answered. On the table was the same leather notebook he used to write in. Open in the middle of the page, the last line was written in pale blue ink. If one day I am no longer here, let the story end here. No need for more noise, as long as people still know how to stop. Jordan stood there for a long time. She knew Elias was gone. No one knew where, only that he had gone as quietly as he had lived. She gently closed the book and hugged it to her chest. A tear fell onto the cover, but in her heart, it was not sadness, but peace. The following year, Jordan made her final documentary. She called it The Man Who Stopped the Sky. It had no actors, no soundtrack, just a series of slow-motion shots, and the testimonies of people who had met Elias. I don't know why he wasn't angry at that moment, said a flight attendant on Flight 703. But I remember clearly, when he looked at me, I saw sympathy in his eyes. It was as if he was forgiving the whole world. A boy named Marcus Hill, now a technology student, shared I wrote him a letter. He replied with just one line, but it changed my life. Now I develop software to help autistic children learn to calm down by breathing. Monroe is not against technology, a Harvard professor says in the film. He is simply reminding us that technology should serve humanity, not replace the human soul. The film ends with a shot of the San Francisco skyline, where the sunset sets over the sparkling water. Jordan's voice is heard in the background. He never said he was right. He just did the right thing. And maybe that's why the world still remembers him. The film reached over 100 million views in its first month alone. But Jordan did not hold a press conference. She posted a single line. He stopped. Now it's our turn to continue. 10 years later, the world held its first global day of silence. On that day, every automated system on the planet, from airlines to banks to social media, stopped working for an hour. Not by accident, but by human initiative. An hour of silence for humanity to reflect on itself. In the New York Square, thousands of people sat quietly. No one said a word. On the giant screen, Elias Monroe's image appeared, his voice deep and slow from an old recording. If one day the world stops without fear, then we will truly know how to fly. Many people cried, not because they were sorry, but because they understood. That same day, at a small school in Georgia, a young teacher told her students the story of Flight 703. You know, she said, that man didn't scream. He didn't hit anybody. He didn't hurt anybody. He just stopped. And because of that, the whole world had to think. A student raised his hand and asked, "Teacher, if I encounter injustice, should I stop?" The teacher smiled and replied, "Stopping does not mean giving up. It means you do not let anger control you. When you are calm enough to choose your response, you have already won." The whole class was silent. Outside the window, the sound of a plane flew by, leaving a long streak of light in the blue sky. Jordan, now elderly, lives in a small apartment overlooking the sea. Every morning she makes a cup of mint tea, opens the window, and listens to the sound of the waves. On the table is an old photograph, Elias smiling, his eyes shining with simple faith. She occasionally receives letters from young people all over the world. They tell her that they are practicing the 3 touches. 1 tap to stop, 1 touch to understand yourself, 1 tap to start over. She read each letter, smiling. She understood that Elias never really left. He just melted into the silence of this world, like a breath. One spring afternoon, Jordan went to the beach, carrying Elias's last notebook. She stood looking at the sparkling water, then opened the notebook and read softly, "Every great act begins with a moment of stillness. If you don't find peace within yourself, you will never bring it to the world." She closed the book and set it down on the water. The waves gently carried it away. Jordan said softly, "You stopped. Elias, now it's our turn to fly." A gust of wind blew. A flock of seagulls spread their wings and soared through the blue sky. She watched, squinting against the sun, then smiled, the same smile he had given her years ago. And somewhere, in the silence between sky and sea, a voice seemed to ring out, warm, deep and light as the wind. 3 touches, for courage, for truth, and for faith. The sky is still blue, the sea is still rough, but in the hearts of men, one thing has changed forever. They have learned to stop and begin. 20 years after the day the skies stood still, the world has changed beyond recognition. Planes now run entirely on clean energy. Artificial intelligence is integrated into almost every field. And the pace of things is so fast that humans have resorted to Monroe pause mode to control the pace of life. In the city of New Avalon, an emerging technology hub in California, a group of young students are working on their final project. The project is called Sky Stories, a virtual reality platform that allows users to relive important historical moments. And on the list of suggestions, there is one story that makes everyone speechless when they see it. The Man Who Stopped the Sky. The Man Who Stopped the Sky. The group leader, a girl named Maya Hill, 18 years old, with slightly curly hair and deep eyes, said softly, "That is my grandfather's story." The group looked at her in surprise. "Your grandfather," Marcus Hill, one student asked. "He was the founder of the Monroe Foundation education program." Maya nodded. "You told me you were just a boy who received a letter from someone who stopped the sky." They began digging through the archives. Old films, audio recordings, letters, all housed in the global archives. Each piece of data they uncovered was a piece of a legend. One evening, when the room was lit only by the light from the monitor, Maya played a rare recording. Dr. Elias Monroe's voice rang out, deep, slow, and warm as a heartbeat. "People often ask me why I don't fight back when I'm treated unfairly. I tell them that if I let my anger decide, the other person wins. But if I choose to stay silent and make it a reminder to the world, then we all win." The room fell silent. No one spoke. One student whispered, "He speaks as if to our times." Maya looked up at the screen, her eyes sparkling. Not just for the times, for each person. The next day, they visited the Jordan Ellis Museum, a museum built after Jordan's death, which houses her and Elias's entire legacy. In the largest room, a large photograph hung on the wall, Elias standing by the window of an airplane, looking out at the sky, his eyes gentle and distant. Below the photo, there was a line. Silence has its own voice. The guide, an older woman, smiled as she saw Maya staring at the photo. "You know, little girl," he used to say, "we don't need many great men. We just need many who listen." Maya nodded and replied softly, "He is right. But the world today seems to have forgotten how to listen." The woman smiled sadly. "Maybe so, but someone will make it stop." Again, that evening, Maya returned to her dormitory and sat down in front of her computer. She played back Jordan's old video where she talked about Elias. He is neither a hero nor a victim. He is a mirror for us to look at ourselves in. She paused for a few seconds, then opened a new note file. The text on the screen read Project Sky Stories, Episode 1, The Day the Sky Stopped. She began to write the introduction. In 2030, a black man was denied a first-class seat. He responded not with anger, but with a calmness that made the world listen. His 3 taps stopped 173 planes, and 8 billion people began to think. But the real story doesn't end there. It begins in that silence. The voice read aloud, soft and steady. Maya listened, then closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt as if her grandfather were sitting beside her, smiling, and Elias Monroe was somewhere, far away, among the clouds. A few months later, Sky Stories. The Day the Sky Stopped was officially released. No one expected it to become a global phenomenon. In virtual space, viewers were placed in the cabin of the plane, watching Elias being asked to leave his seat. But this time, they were not just observers. They could feel it, his heartbeat, his eyes, his breathing as he chose not to get angry. In the final scene, when Elias taps the table 3 times, the screen fades out, leaving only his voice. If you are listening to this, please stop for a moment. Maybe the world needs you to do it. When the video ended, millions of people were still stuck in the virtual space. Many were in tears, not knowing why. Perhaps because they felt themselves in that silence. A week later, Maya received a letter from a stranger. It read, "Thank you for sharing your story. I used to work 16 hours a day and can't remember the last time I had a real conversation with anyone. Last night, I stopped for 5 minutes, turned everything off, and just watched my daughter sleep. For the first time, I felt alive. Maya finished reading and looked up. The sky outside was unusually blue. She understood that Elias's legacy was not in data, nor in fame. It was in the moments when people stop, even for a second, to realize what mattered most. At her graduation ceremony, the University of New Avalon held a special ceremony. Before handing out the diploma, the entire hall performed the 3 Monroe touches together. 1. To stop and appreciate the past. 2. To understand the present. 3. To move forward into the future. As the final buzz faded, Maya stepped onto the stage to receive an honorary degree for her work on Sky Stories. She looked at the thousands of faces before her, smiled, and said, "Perhaps our generation will fly higher than ever. But I hope we will still know how to stop, to remember that it is the heart, not the machine, that makes us different." The whole hall stood up and applauded loudly. Not loudly, but with a tone of gratitude. That night, Maya returned to her small apartment. She stood on the balcony, looking up at the dark, starry sky. At one point, she thought she saw a faint light moving slowly overhead, a plane trailing a long trail across the sky. She whispered, 3 touches, for courage, for truth, and for faith. A gentle wind blew, and for a moment, Maya felt something very deep, as if the sky was smiling, telling its own story. The sky never forgets the one who stopped it. It just waits to tell the story to those who know how to listen. 25 years after Dr. Elias Monroe grounded 173 planes, the world has entered a completely new era. People no longer fly planes, no longer drive cars, no longer even use their hands to input commands. Everything happens by thought. Mind-reading technology makes life faster, more precise, but also easier to lose control. At a global technology conference in Geneva, thousands of attendees were waiting to see the debut of the world's first autonomous aviation system, called Aurora. Aurora is said to be able to predict crashes before they happen. It knows when to avoid, when to land, and when to stop. The host stepped onto the stage, his voice booming through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this system is built on a classic humanistic principle, taken from the writings of Dr. Elias Monroe, whom the world has never forgotten." The whole hall applauded. On the giant screen, the words appeared, "Rule 01, when in doubt, stop. Rule 02, when in fear, listen. Rule 03, when there is an opportunity, believe." Everyone stood up at once. They knew. That was the 3 touches philosophy programmed into the core of Aurora. In the audience, Maya Hill, now a doctor of ethical engineering, sat quietly. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes were as clear and bright as ever. She looked at the words on the screen and felt something well up in her chest. Beside her was a boy about 12 years old, named Eli Hill, Maya's nephew. He tilted his head and asked softly, "Auntie, did Mr. Monroe really stop the sky?" Maya smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "Not just the sky. Eli, he makes the whole world stop and think." The boy was silent, looking up at the screen, as if trying to picture that moment. After the conference, Maya drove Eli to the beach in Santa Cruz, where she had visited with her grandfather Marcus, where Marcus told stories about Elias Monroe. The sea was calm that day. The blue water reflected the orange sunset. Maya stopped the car and opened the door for Eli to get out. He ran straight to the beach, squealing with delight as the ripples chased his feet. Maya watched, her heart as light as the wind. Then she took out a small frayed notebook from her bag. The pages yellowed. On the first page was an old handwriting. "If one day the world forgets how to stop, tell them this story." She read silently, her voice catching in her throat. She knew she was the last person to have the original copy of Elias's notebook. Eli ran back, pointing out to the sea. "Miss, I see a plane." Maya looked up. Overhead, a plane streaked across the sky, trailing a trail of light. The Aurora system controlled it. No pilot, no voice, just technological perfection. She smiled. "This world is flying high. But you know, what makes it safe is not because of technology. It is because people dare to stop and understand it." The boy looked at her, then asked innocently, "Is Mr. Monroe happy?" The question made Maya silent for a few seconds. Then she replied, "Yes, because he doesn't need anyone to remember him, just people to remember the right thing." Eli nodded. He didn't understand everything, but he felt something warm. That evening, the two of them sat by the fire. The sound of the waves mingled with the wind through the palm trees. Maya told Eli about the flight. "There was a man named Elias Monroe," she began, her voice even and deep. "He bought a first-class ticket, but was asked to leave his seat because of the color of his skin. He didn't argue. He just asked, if justice has a price, who is entitled to pay it? And then, with 3 taps, the world stopped." Eli looked at her, his eyes shining in the firelight. "What happened next?" "The world is changing," she said. "Not overnight, but little by little. People are starting to realize that justice doesn't come from power, it comes from awareness." The boy was silent for a long time, then asked softly, "If something unfair happened now, could I do the same as him?" Maya put her hand on his shoulder. "Okay, but remember, stopping doesn't mean standing still. It means you choose to act out of faith, not anger." Eli nodded slightly. The next day, Maya received an invitation from the Global Science Institute. They wanted her to participate in the Legacy of Silence project, a program to teach Monroe's philosophy to a new generation. The letter contains a quote, "There can be no real progress if people forget to learn how to listen." She read the sentence over and over again. A strange feeling welled up inside her. Memory, gratitude, and relief. She understood that Elias's legacy was no longer a story. It had become the moral foundation of the world. The program's opening ceremony was held in a large square. Thousands of young students from all over poured in, wearing translation headsets and holding notebooks with the pause code written on them. When Maya stepped onto the stage, the entire square fell silent. She looked down at the hundreds of young faces and spoke slowly. "You were born into a world where speed is the measure of value. But remember, sometimes the fastest way to get where you need to go is to stop." She paused for a few seconds, letting the air soak into each listener. "The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs people brave enough to listen. And if you can do that, you are the next Elias Monroe." The entire square stood up. The applause was loud, but quickly died down. For a moment, thousands of people fell silent. A moment of silence, overwhelming, beautiful, and powerful. On the big screen, an image of Elias appeared, a gentle face, deep eyes. Below it were the words, "The sky never forgets the one who made it stop." Maya looked up. Her voice choked. "Thank you, Elias, for teaching us how to fly." Night fell. She walked home with Eli. The boy looked out the car window. The sky was dark and peaceful. He said softly, "I think I understand. Auntie, when I stopped, I heard more." Maya smiled. "Yes. Eli, that's the sky telling you stories." The car sped through the night. Through the thin mist, high above, a shooting star streaked across the sky, leaving a small streak of light. And somewhere, in that vast space, there seemed to be a familiar voice, deep and gentle as a breath. 3 touches, for courage, for truth, and for faith. The sky still stops, not because of technology, but because people finally know how to slow down and listen to their hearts. The story, Black CEO denied first-class seat. Then grounds 173. Planes with 3 taps is not just a story about discrimination or power. It is a story about dignity and the power of calm. 2 seemingly weak things, but enough to change the world. Dr. Elias Monroe did not react with anger, nor did he use his power to retaliate. He simply chose to stop himself from becoming a victim, to stop the system from taking a look. In today's world, where people react more than they understand, the lesson is even more valuable sometimes. Stopping is the most powerful action. Justice does not come from shouting, but from perseverance and the belief that human dignity cannot be bought. When we stop to listen, to understand, and to act in the right moment, we not only change our lives, but also change the world around us. If you feel this story touches your heart, please like, share with people you believe need to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so we can spread healing stories, moments that make people better. Because sometimes, just 3 touches, the world can stop to learn how to love.